What's up in there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gaming here to share with you another episode of my worst to best series. This time I'll be doing a traditional style ranking of all the primary seasons for one of my all-time favorite animes that I used to watch when I was growing up, that being Yu-Gi-Oh Duel Monsters, which happens to be related to my favorite card game of all time, simply titled Yu-Gi-Oh! The Card Game. Now, this series actually ran from 2001 to 2006, has 5 seasons, has 224 episodes if I'm correct, making it, even to this day, even though this series is over 20 years old, being the longest running Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime series out of all, even more than the current one going right now. Now, if you do happen to enjoy this ranking by the end of the video, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep track of me on all my future episodes. And if you have any suggestions for future ranking videos or reviews or just any type of video in general, make sure you let me know in the comments down below as well. So, without wasting any more time, I would like to start off by starting with what I believe is, without question, the worst season of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime series. Okay, without question, going in for number 5, the worst season of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters had to be Season 5, the final season. I believe the problem is that by this point, the creators didn't quite know how to end this series. I think that they knew that they wanted to end it with Season 5. They just didn't know how to make the primary story arc last as long as a true season. Now, the shortest season of any Yu-Gi-Oh! Series is about 40 episodes, and the story arc that they want to focus on simply couldn't be expanded that long. So what they ended up doing is cutting into 3 different arcs, 2 of which were completely pointless. The first arc, which surrounded around the Grand Championship arc, only lasted about 14 episodes and was completely pointless. And when you take into effect the events that happened at the end of Season 4, it made no sense to jump into the Grand Championship arc when nothing really happened. There was no significance to it. Now, I will confess that there were a couple duels in that series that were actually really good and some of the best, but outside of those 2 duels, there was really nothing added to it. Then it was followed by a 12-part series of Capsule Monsters, which is completely forgettable. I only ever saw it once and thought it was some of the worst episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! I've ever seen, because the only good thing you could say ever happened in those 12 episodes is that most of the game got to do something instead of just stand on the sidelines and cheer. Now, when you get to the last 26, or I believe 24 episodes, I think it's 26, 26 episodes, that actually focuses on finding out the true identity of the Pharaoh and going into what many consider to be the greatest duel of all time, which is the final duel between the Pharaoh and Yu-Gi-Oh, which is the last duel in the entire series. But really, that's the only real high point of Season 5. Outside of that, it's pretty plain. Not enough time is given to develop any story arc, and 2 of the 3 are completely forgettable, which is unfortunately why I think Season 5 is without question the worst season of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. Now, going into number 4 is going to shock a lot of people, but I believe that the 4th spot has to go to the first season surrounding the Duelist Kingdom story arc. Now, I know that in terms of nostalgic value, the Duelist Kingdom story arcs had started all. This is the series where Yugimoto's grandpa's soul gets taken by Maximilian Pegasus, who created the game. They have to go to his island at Duelist Kingdom. They have to take part in his little tournament and fight their way through the ranks, going through all different duelists until Yugi finally takes on Pegasus, manages to defeat him using a pretty cool trick, and then gets his grandpa's soul, with the last 11 episodes kind of being used as setup for future elements that would take part in future seasons. Which is why, if you really take those 11 episodes out, this series is actually only 40 episodes. I mean, in total, it's 51 episodes, which, technically makes it the longest season. But in terms of focusing on just one story arc, it really is tied with the shortest one, which will be a later season. Now, I think this one is also low because when you really think of the quality of duels that the first season had, the game at this point, they were still trying to figure things out. So the rules are completely made up. They're making things up as they go. They're using moves and strategies and techniques and using cards in ways that are completely inaccurate to the actual game itself, which means that most, if not all, of those duels lost a lot of they weren't really authentic duels. They were duels that were driven by the story instead of actually making sense in the context of the actual game itself. Now, there's like maybe a couple of duels I think they're actually worth going back and rewatching just because of entertainment value, but outside of the nostalgic value, there's really not just a lot of great duels, and therefore it doesn't really have a much high rewatch value, at least for me. And this is someone who was watching the anime series from the very beginning and really loved the Duel's Kingdom story arcs because of how much it means, and the stakes that are put in place. But overall, I do certainly think it's one of the weaker seasons, and I think if someone were to go watch some of the older episodes and they happen to skip the Duel's Kingdom season, outside of, I'd say, the Maximilian, the final duel with Yugi and Pegasus, that's really the main duel that you should see. But other than that, I don't really see too many duels beyond that or before that I think are actually all that great, which is why I would rank the first season of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duelist Kingdom story arc as number 4 on my list. Now, ranked number 3 on my list in the middle of the pack is going to have to go to Season 3, which is overall titled Enter the Shadow Realm. Now, Season 3, I think, had the same problem as Season 5 in terms of none of the arcs had enough content to be long enough to be their own individual seasons. So what they did in this one is they simply split it in half. So half of the season was focused on one arc, and the other half actually focused on a more significant arc. The first half of Season 3 actually added as a continuation to a virtual reality storyline that took place in the last 11 episodes of Season 1, dealing with this group of corporate men known as the Big Five who are trying to take over Kyber Corp's, Seto Kaiba's company, Kyber Corp. So their minds got trapped in a virtual world, and they want to take on the cast of the protagonist characters. And if they happen to beat them in a duel, they get to take over their body and return to the real world. So at some point, they, I guess, lost their real bodies and are trying to get new bodies. And they team up with the actual biological son of Ghostboro Kaiba, who happened to be the one who adopted Seto Kaiba and Mokuba Kaiba. And the reason I like this arc is because it actually focuses on Seto Kaiba. And Seto Kaiba is, without question, my favorite character. So to actually have an arc that focuses on Kaiba's backstory and actually goes a bit personal into his character, because Kaiba is such a shut-off character, I thought was really great. The problem that it falls short is because in the very last episode of that arc, he just kind of says, like, why don't we just pretend that none of that ever happened? So it's immediately forgotten. So all the character development that happened for Seto Kaiba is completely forgotten, and we head right back to the finals of Battle City. Now, the finals of Battle City had, without question, some of the all-time greatest duels. There was only about 5 duels that took place in the Battle City finals, and they are all absolutely some of the best, which is why in some cases you could actually watch all of Season 2, which is Battle City, and if you decide to skip the first half with the virtual reality storyline and just go into the finals, you really aren't missing too much, because there's nothing that happens in the first half of the 3rd season that carries on into anything that happens in this series moving on. It's like it's a completely forgotten arc that has no significance moving forward. None of this is ever brought up again, which makes you wonder, why was it even here to begin with? But again, in terms of quality-wise, but both arcs have a number of quality duels, with the finals of the Battle City tournament actually having, without question, some of the best duels, which is what elevates it, in my opinion, over Seasons 5 and Seasons 1. But again, it is cut in half, has a great number of duels, definitely have a lot of rewatchable duels, but for me, it sits right in the middle simply because of how they didn't build off anything that happened in the first half of Season 3, which is why it's ranked number 3 on my list. Ranked number 2 on my list is also another entry that is going to surprise a lot of people, because I've heard nothing but bad things from people who actually enjoyed watching the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters series, and that has to go to Season 4, or Waking the Dragon arc. This season is way better than people give it credit for. Now, in terms of numbers, it is without question the shortest episode with only 40 episodes. But I think that this is one of the only 2 times where every single episode was focused on one arc. There is nothing that leads to the next arc, and every single episode, in my opinion, is very significant in terms of developing not only the protagonist, but the antagonist too. I think that the antagonist trio of Raphael, Valen, and Alistair was probably one of the strongest trios of antagonist duelists that we've ever seen. I mean, it is common that the main villain, who in this case was Dart, would have henchmen, but I think that when you take all the henchmen that we had had up to this point, these were definitely some of the strongest ones. They were definitely stronger than any of the the henchmen that Pegasus had, and certainly were stronger duelists than a lot of the henchmen that Merrick had from the second season. I think that the inclusion of the primary dragons of Critias, Hermos, and Timaeus is definitely one of the best entries of styled cards that we've ever had. So much so that all three of the primary decks that I use in my real decks actually include all three dragons in specific decks. So this is the one I feel the most attached to. And the fact that this was one of the first times that the main protagonist actually took a legitimate loss, which is one of the highlights of the entire seasons of Yu-Gi-Oh Duel Monsters. And I think that once you were able to separate the Pharaoh from Yugi and you got to focus on his character as an individual, I think that outside of the last half of Season 5, this was the most amount of character development you actually saw for the Pharaoh character. And because of that, the stakes are at its most highest. And I think that in terms of difficulty, Season 4 had probably, without question, the single most difficult, overwhelming duel in the history of the series. Now, I've heard some people say that the last duel for Season 4 is like a bit over the top because Darts is using all these over the top OP cards, but I think that's kind of the point. You want to give Yugi, and in this duel he was actually dueling alongside Kaiba, you want to give these two, the top duelists, the top two protagonists of your franchise, to go up against the absolute top tier opponent that the series ever encountered, and they have a pretty titanic duel that ends in a very epic fashion, which is why, without question, Season 4 is one of the better seasons of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, at least in my opinion, but sadly it can only come in second place. But heck, holding the second place on this list is not really a bad thing, but heck, it unfortunately has to go second to what I think is, without question, the best season of the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters series of all time. Number 1, and without question, the best season of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters has to go to Season 2, which is the Battle City arc. This one had everything. It, without question, has the best story with the inclusion of the introduction of the Egyptian god cards, which would be like a mainstay staple element that would last throughout the remaining seasons. It had the best quality of duels. I think it had the most amount of quality duels, and I do think it is probably the most also better focused seasons. I don't think it's as long as, say, Season 1, which I think that one had 51 episodes. This one had 48 episodes, but each one of them was very, very significant. There were definitely some duels that tested Joey, which required him to develop as a duelist, which, in my opinion, I never really saw Joey as a strong duelist, but I think it was certainly during the Battle City tournament, both in all of Season 2 and the second half of Season 3, that he did the most amount of development and becoming really a very top tier rated duelist. Maybe not at the all-time tier, but he could certainly challenge top tier duelists. And I think that throughout the part of Season 2 and the end of Season 3, he really showed that level of development. I thought that Yugi also had a number of development. He had probably some of the toughest duels that he would ever encounter in the entire series. And even though Kaiba really didn't take part in many duels throughout his own tournament, when he was dueling, they did have a number of significance. I think that Merrick is probably the best realized duelist and probably the sickest, because he's such a sadist when the evil Yami Merrick takes over and starts dueling himself, which, up until that point, I think out of any of the main antagonists, he's the one that actually duels the most. And while I don't think he's the best duelist in the world, he's probably one of the more creative duelists with his use of the Winged Dragon of Ra, which for the longest time, the way he uses it really shows how powerful that card really is. And if you've actually seen how the Winged Dragon of Ra is now in the current game, it without question has the most support, which makes it really one of the probably the strongest of the 3 Egyptian god cards to use in an actual deck. So this was a precursor to that. So really, that's why I think overall the Battle City tournament is without question the best arc out of any season of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime series. So that is my ranking of the 5 main seasons of Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, if you did happen to actually watch all 5 seasons of Yu-Gi-Oh! Or at least most of them, how would you rank these seasons? Share your rankings with me and everyone else in the comments down below, and tell me why you would rank them where they are. And like always, I want to thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll catch you all next time.